Now, what you have to understand about Boba Fett is that I invented the character from a certain point of view. I was about 7 or 8 or 9 years old. So this would be 1977 to 1979, somewhere in that ballpark. Oh, I have no proof of this, but it did happen. Even if I could find the sketch now, which I've searched through 4 of my spiral Star Wars notebooks from 1977. Dum, 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 dum. Dum, 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 dum. Can't find this sketch. I can still picture it in my mind. Even if I had it to lay hand to it, I couldn't carbon date it and prove when it was drawn, so you're just gonna have to take my word for this. But I drew this sketch, and here-ish was Darth Vader. Over here was a character that I called a super trooper, a super stormtrooper. Now, granted, that's not a very inventive name, but you know what? I remember when all the Star Wars fans were ridiculing George Lucas for Phantom Menace, he creates the battle droids, Attack of the Clones, he creates the super battle droids, and we got wind of that name because they like registered a web address or something to super battle droid. And people are like, God, that's not a very creative name. I'm like, I think it sounds fine. But Super Trooper was, you know, supposed to be halfway between a stormtrooper and Darth Vader. Stormtroopers are white, Darth Vader is black, so I shaded my Super Trooper gray. And the interesting thing is that Vader here, Super Trooper here, and the Super Trooper is shooting something, a ray, a grappling hook, maybe just a dart, I don't remember, but it's going behind Vader and it's striking one of the heroes, and I want to say it was Luke, and it's freezing him in a big block of ice. So like 3/4 of him is a huge square-edged, you know, block of ice. You can see him through it, and then, you know, the rest of him is still exposed. So you're like, yeah, well, Boba Fett had a flamethrower though, so you've got that wrong. But Boba Fett's present when Darth Vader freezes Han Solo in carbonite, and that was a test to test the carbon freezing for Luke. So look at all the things that I was coming up with. Now you're like, but you might have seen The Empire Strikes Back and then gone and draw that. It's possible, yes, but I clearly have a memory of being at my grandmother's house, finding this old notebook of mine at some point after having seen The Empire Strikes Back, and flipping the page and going, holy cow, look what I predicted, you know. So that's just my memory of it, and you can take it with a grain of salt. But I had occasion to discuss such things as this with author Brian Daley in the waning months of his life. Now, I didn't know he was battling pancreatic cancer at the time that we were corresponding, so I sent him a fan letter, he responded to it, we exchanged some phone calls and some letters, and I interviewed him for Martin Thurn's fanzine, Star Wars Collector, and then I found out, you know, he had passed. But in that couple of months of correspondence that we had, man, I was living like 3 different places. I think I was living at my parents' house, then in an apartment with my first wife, and then in my first house. So yeah, that's a pretty epical point of my life that I had Brian Daley in my life. And then after he passed, my oldest son was actually born on his birthday and is partially named for him. So, but one of the topics was that there were certain elements of one of his books that came out prior to 1983, Han Solo and the Lost Legacy, which I felt were predicting visuals that we saw in later Lucasfilms, because there were Han and the good guys get captured by these savages, and they're all pinned up except for the droid. And it is a little bit like C-3PO and the Ewoks, you know. There's also, he explained how Han got the scar on his chin, like Harrison Ford has, by saying that it was on this particular trip he got a knife wound and he didn't have any synth flesh, was what he called before they came up with Bacta. They didn't have any synth flesh to put on the wound, so it had a scar. And I'm like, well, okay, that's kind of like in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where he has the whip and he gets the scar as a young boy. And there were multiple of these things. So I put it to Brian in a letter, and he came back and he said, oh, you forgot about turning the Falcon on its side to squeak through a narrow rock cleft, which he had done in Han Solo at Star's End and was later done in The Empire Strikes Back. And his answer was that such parallel thinking or parallel evolution of ideas was almost inevitable. You had so many people wanting to play in that universe that, you know, and so many of them were drawing on the same influences. He listed things like Terry and the Pirates that he had read as a kid, and all the old Republic serials that he had watched, that Steven Spielberg and George Lucas had watched, that it was simply natural that there would be parallel evolution of ideas. So I say, yeah, okay, I did invent Boba Fett independently of the people that invented the character for The Empire Strikes Back and actually the Star Wars Holiday Special. Your mileage may vary. So while I was looking for the Boba Fett sketch, I came across something else in this notebook that I was keeping up until about 2010, and it was a tally sheet, multiple tally sheets, where I would jot down how many Star Wars figures I had bought and what my current grand total was. And at the point that I stopped keeping track, it had just gone over 4,000. It was 4,001. I bought 6 action figures, and it was the boarding party set for Star Tours, plus I think like 1 extra figure I'd gotten from David Yeh. So 4,001 figures 11 years ago, and I've bought many, many more since then. Now that's not just vintage, that's everything. You know, Power of the Force 2, Power of the Jedi, every line that came since, you know, that point. So why so many Star Wars figures? What was the desire to keep buying Star Wars figures? Well, I feel like the main incidents that made me want more and more and more Star Wars figures, and trying to fill that hole inside myself, that Toyaholic hole, has to do with Boba Fett.